This is Brave New Pod, the official podcast of Brave New World, an original series available streaming now exclusively on Peacock. And I'm your host, Angeliqué Roché. In the last episode, we spoke with showrunner David Wiener and actor Jessica Brown Findlay about what it took to put together the first 3 episodes of Brave New World. Today, we're meeting with some old faces and some new. We're going to be chatting some more with David Wiener in this episode, particularly about how he decided to reshape some of the characters from the original novel to fit this re-imaged world. And we're going to be talking with actor Harry Lloyd, who plays Bernard Marx. So here's the thing. For those of you who are making your way through Brave New World, spoiler warning, we're going to be sticking mostly to episodes 4, 5, and 6 during these conversations. So if you haven't finished those, or if you want to go into 7, 8, and 9 without any hints or foreshadowing from us, then you should go finish the show. But we've waited long enough, so it's time to start chatting about the next episode. Episode 4. We've toyed with this idea that you've departed from the book. No. Episode 4, there is a strong departure from the source material, including, like, not completely. It's not all gone. There are nuggets of it as we get into episode 5 and 6, but there's one key part about, there's this moment on the precipice with John and his father, and there's John, whether on accident or through anger, kills his dad, right?
Right.
How were you hoping that would be a centerpiece in the narrative? Understanding that we are only talking about 4, 5, and 6 at this moment.
Right. So in the book, right, the director sends Bernard, who he knows, is a danger to him, a rival, sends him to the Savage Lands, to the one place where there's a person that keeps the one secret that can be his undoing. And then Bernard knows this, and then Bernard brings John back, and Bernard knows the director's John's father, and then John says something like, "Hey, Dad," and the director is ashamed, and the director resigns and disappears. Right. And that's how it gets handled in the book.
It's clean. It's a lot cleaner than getting thrown off a cliff.
I don't think it's as even logically clean, but like it feels really undramatic. It's a big event and it gets dispensed with in a way that doesn't feel like it's as big as the collision could be. And so we went a different way with it, where the director sends Bernard to the Savage Lands with the expectation that Bernard isn't coming back.
When I sent you to the Savage Lands, I thought you'd find your place. That maybe, for once in your life, you could fit. I wanted that for you, Bernard. But you never quite follow through, do you?
He's supposed to be the new warden of the Savage Lands.
The Savage Lands, exactly. So Bernard comes back and the director's like, that's not good. And Bernard still doesn't know, because he can't conceive of the idea that this director, this man who is like the source of power in his world, could possibly be something as crazy, as radical as a father. The most dramatic scene is where John has that realization. And either way, I'd say the result is more or less the same. The director's out of the story, or at least, physically out of the story, in both cases. Ours not only allows us to once again have a moment where John, doesn't, you refer to like, does he do it intentionally? Does he not? And I think like that's John. Like he is indirectly responsible for a lot of damage. He is disruptive in a way that he may or may not, really kind of know at the time. He puts the bullets in the guns. Does he pull the trigger? No. He knocks Dad off the cliff. Did he mean to, or did he get pushed first? And there's a number of other events that happen where John could plausibly say, like, it's not my fault. But ultimately what we're working towards with the character is John having to face his own responsibility and say, like, he has to have that reckoning.
Which is interesting because you see out like John, who's clearly, there's hints that he has he is phenotypically a alpha. Genetically, he's an alpha. The shape of his eye is that of a very rare alpha.
His ocular dimensions, the biotopical details of his target neurons, they're rare. Alpha exotic even. He's less than 1%, but he is different.
He's not an alpha.
Well, his eyeball is.
He's the one genetic legacy of New London. Everybody else is, assigned a value in the petri dish on the, but John actually is the product of a natural birth between two New Londoners. So he inherits it.
Well, speaking of eyes, everyone seems to have something in theirs, unless they take it out, which I think was an interesting decision that they're allowed to take it out. It is a AI named Indra.
Yeah.
Indra is a social network. It's connectivity. Like, we keep getting these murmurs within the first couple episodes, and now within these 3 episodes.
Your optic interface connects you to Indra, and Indra connects you to, well, everyone. With your OI, you'll always be connected.
It feels like social media on steroids, but I feel like it is so much more.
It is. I think it's like, so again, it is about like taking these ideas that Huxley had about these human tendencies and using what we know about technology to extrapolate that. The one thing that he obviously couldn't foresee is like the degree to which we would become. He knew that humans would use technology to avoid discomfort. That's what I think he feared. But I don't think he understood how voyeuristic our experience of each other would become, and how we would use, our technology actually to be superficially invested in each other's lives. So in our story, we have the optic interface, right, which is this lens that dials into your, cerebral cortex, and what we, I don't know if we're supposed to talk beyond 4, 5, or 6 here, but what it allows people to do is experience through someone else's eyes.
And they can look through yours and see just how fabulous your life is. Your OI lets everyone know who you are and who they are to you.
So it's like Instagram on steroids, right? It allows you to go and have an experience that someone else is seeing, and be where they are and know who they're with. And
everyone is for everyone.
And everybody's accountable in that way. You brought up surveillance earlier, and if the people being surveilled are doing the surveilling, then I think like that's a really strong way to keep people in line.
Wow.
But yeah. So Indra is we learn is the AI that, and it is referred to throughout the story with increasing frequency, but she's the AI that we know was used to construct. We learned it was to construct New London, and she has a really close relationship with Mustafa Mond. Indra, I guess we'd wait to talk about like kind of how we thought about that, but there's no religion in New London. There's no, because that can be, as we know, a source of contention and a disrupting factor in societies. There's no money. There's, at least in their minds, no bias in the way that we have bias in our culture. Though I'd argue they do, but they just don't think they do. And Indra is kind of this thing that people don't think about too much, because that can get unsettling too. So they just kind of know Indra's going to take care of things. Indra always has. Everything always runs smoothly. The trains are always on time, and Indra will abide. Like everybody's fine with Indra. I don't think they think about it too much, but they do know that Indra is that thing that is keeping them all connected.
The system knows, John. Indra sees everything. Surely you've noticed that everyone travels in the designated...
Says who?
It's interesting you mentioned that they don't think there's bias, because it is it is snuck into some very interesting places from the moment that she has been asked to get up out of her seat on the tour of the Savage Lands, where Lenina is like, being told she's a beta plus, I'm an alpha, you get up, or this idea that epsilons can't feel. How would an epsilon feel sad? They're not capable of that because of the genetic structure that has kind of been composed. And so I think it's really interesting because now you introduce John into polite New London society. But before we get into that, I gotta talk about the design of Old London. And I'm just gonna call it Old London because when the director falls off of the cliff, the viewer suddenly gets something they haven't had yet, which is this beautiful ruin porn, which there's no other really good way to say it, of Old London in its decaying state. And it's this one shot that's so contrasting between the two different levels. Like, what went into doing that shot? Like, I literally had to rewind it twice because it was so wonderfully contrasted. And it's the first time you realize, oh, this was built over London.
I mean, I'm really excited that paid off as well as it did. Like, it's something that, you know, I almost think like the first time we thought about, well, where does the director fall? I just love the idea of having this big dramatic moment that actually opened up the world a bit more for us visually, you know, and brought into our minds this idea that the whole time we've been in this city, we've never once considered or seen any aspect of its history. And this is something that's really important to, and I think very scary for Huxley, is that people would disregard history and fail to learn from it. But the idea that, oh no, there is a backstory here. There is a world that was before. And it makes the promise of we're going to touch on why that is the way it is. You know, it makes the world, I think, a lot bigger. And, you know, we actually are about to go down there in subsequent episodes with Mustafa.
Speaking of backstory, we also explore this weird and very bizarre relationship between Helm Watson, director of Pleasure Bomb, and Bernard Marx. Because Helm Holtz Watson, source materials, is very reserved. And then you meet Helm Watson, which I feel like Hannah brought something to developing that role out.
Yeah.
What went into bringing that to life? Because in this world where pleasure is so important, this is a very important role that she has, being the director of Pleasure Bomb and creating these feelies, which, you know, initially where people thought, you know, this whole to the sound being added to movies, now we're adding this feeling to it. How did that come about? I have no other words. It's very lovely. It was delightful.
Thank you. And she deserves so much credit. And I think it's one of my favorite relationships in the story is the one between her and Bernard. Like, you're right, in the book. Yeah, they're friends.
And I'm listening. I always listen, don't I? Because I'm your friend, Bernard.
The great thing about it is that it offered us an opportunity to show what a friendship would look like, right? Like, that they are loyal to each other in a different way. And you know, Helm's a little more alpha plus than most alpha pluses, in the same way that Henry's a little more alpha plus than most alpha pluses. So there are like all these little coded biases even within the cast that Bernard's bumping up against all the time, you know. But the great thing, first of all, I should say that feelies are something that Huxley came up with, the idea that you'd be able to have a physical experience like the movies, but actually feel what these people feel. And that Helm is an artist is, I think, the thing that we brought to it. And that Helm is interested kind of in the same way that Lenina is, but for a different reason, about feelings that are bigger, scarier, different, deeper than the ones that they're allowed to feel and trade in New London. And so, you know, that's why when she meets John, who comes to New London with all of these experiences, memories, and the emotional baggage, to Helm, like, he's a fascinating resource, and she winds up being really changed by diving into that. And, I think that for her and Bernard, I mean, I guess we started out talking about bias, but even in the book, they're both aware that each other has certain questions that are normally not permitted or spoken about in a kind of a broad way. And I love that idea that these two people kind of have this established chat, and then they kind of check each other. So when Bernard has a really profound experience, and he comes to Helm saying, I felt this thing, I touched the sky, I felt what he felt, that Helms, as his friend, is like, no, you didn't.
I'm telling you that I connected with, I had a vision.
No, you had a bad afternoon.
She does that because she's scared for Bernard. And I think that as much as you can, I think they love each other. Later in the series, they have like a very, Bernard kind of tries to make a big time move at a function for Henry and be the center of attention. It doesn't go well. And Helm's there to catch him,
Physically hurting for Bernard in that entire moment. It was so wonderfully uncomfortable.
He's so good. Harry is just he's a sublime actor. They all are. I mean, and one of the reasons that I think, Hannah's role expanded was that it's not a luxury. It kind of was really kind of scary at the time, but I realized in watching the first episodes as we filmed them, what an incredible cast we were working with, and that there were all these opportunities and these characters, and that these actors deserve to have, complete stories. And so I went back while we were shooting and kind of rewrote the end of the last, I guess, third of it, to make sure that we were serving all of those, Franny and Helm and Mustafa and Henry. And we have these great kind of 8 stories, and C-Jack, and, and made sure that they mattered. And that was in reaction to kind of seeing the wealth of talent. And, Helm deserved a journey because of what Hannah brought to her. And so I worked really hard to try to give that to her.
Well, speaking of World Controller Mond, Mustafa Mond, who clearly, I thought it was extremely interesting, the choice to make her a Black woman, which is incredible.
The great thing about it, first of all, Nina's one of my favorite actors on the planet. The decision to make, Helm or Mustafa not a white guy, that was actually easy, because there's nothing about those characters per se that says they have to be a white guy. And we wanted to create a utopia, right, that was that aligned with our sense of utopia, where you would have diversity and equality. And otherwise, it's definitely not a utopia. Then it's, a segregated system that is, that we all understand to be definitely dystopian. So that, I think, was the first idea was why not, right? And I also think, I don't know and maybe I wouldn't have asked why not, but the writing staff of the show is almost exclusively female. One thing that I knew early on, and as far as creating the staff, was that ultimately the show is going to be about this love triangle and the problems of monogamy. I know how straight, at least how this particular straight guy feels about that, and what are the forces at play. I might have ideas how other people might feel about that, but I'm not aware of, I know I'm not aware of whatever, inherent biases and, things come with being me. And so it was really important for me to have a lot of voices there to kind of check me.
Well, I think that's interesting, because you do get a much stronger iteration of the women characters in this adaptation of A Brave New World. It is very, very clear that the women characters are more complex, they are more central, they have stronger roles, and it's a lot less of, but would she really do that? Is that what she would really do in these moments? But also, kind of going back to the fact that there's a lot of sex, there are a lot of orgies, because it is normalized in this society. But I also understand there were intimacy coordinators, and there was a lot of care that went into finding the balance of normalizing this as a part of the story versus it just being sex for sex sake.
Yeah, I mean, Angelique, like obviously, like you can't adequately serve Brave New World without sex and sex on kind of a large scale. Sex, the way we show sex in the journey of sex itself changes over the course of the story. You know, we start out with a very kind of like idealized, glossy, synchronized version. And then it gets a little more dark and frayed as we see it progressively throughout the season, and we see that Lenina's attitude towards it shifts. And then we also have one instance of, I think, what you'd call like sex where the feelings are involved, and all that was designed in the sense to make that moment distinct, to make that pop be real for those characters. Going to the show, I'd never worked with an intimacy coordinator before, but I knew immediately, like early, even before pre-production, that I would want someone to be in that role. At first, mainly because like I'm a little scared of how to talk about it. I think we all are. Like I had no idea really what an amazing and important role that is. Like I would never ever work again without one. The woman that helped us was Ida O'Brien and her assistant, Kate Lush. And Kate, or Ida, but especially Kate, was with us all the time. And it wasn't just about, like, she was so good at making people feel really safe, really relaxed. Like she just took all the blushing out of it, all of the awkwardness out, and was ready to like kind of, help anybody. The first Pleasure Garden scene we shot in Battersea Park, we took the park over. We had these dancers that worked on the choreography for like a month in advance. They were wonderful. I mean, dancers are always great. The energy and the joy of it was like at 4 a.m. They were just so pumped and just having such a blast. And I didn't know Jessie that well at the time, but it turns out that had she not broken her ankle, she would probably still be a dancer. She was in the Royal Ballet and became an actor because of this injury. And, or she was training with the Royal Ballet, you'd have to ask her. But to see just Jessie have like such a blast with these people, and at no point did it feel heavy, And that's a huge credit to Ida and to Kate, because I don't think you can tell this story about people having carefree attitudes towards sex unless they have a carefree attitude.
I can't stress the importance of intimacy coordinators being a part of a successful production enough, especially for the cast and crew charged with bringing to life New London and its core beliefs of non-monogamy and overwhelming amount of sex. For those familiar with the source material, it's such a pillar of the society that New Londoners live in that Lenina is disciplined for not having enough of it. Bernard, who ironically is struggling to find happiness that doesn't come from a pill or on a pillow, is almost sent permanently to the Savage Lands because of it. And honestly, that's a plot twist that keeps on giving. So it seemed only appropriate to speak to Harry Lloyd, aka Bernard Marx, or Bernie, as we refer to him in the interview, about bringing the character to life, even when the character was having trouble feeling alive himself. How did you approach this role? Because, and I will say, if any character stuck to, and I won't say stuck to the source material like in a loyal way, because I don't think you could do that in this particular adaptation, and I think that's great. I think that's the strength of the adaptation. It stands alone. But where did you start with developing out this character?
Well, I think first of all, you're right. Bernard, in all adaptations and in the book, is somewhere near the heart of things. as an alpha plus who's not quite an alpha plus, and just that jarringness is kind of what the story is about, in a way. So he's a useful embodiment of that. In our version, I suppose, compared to the book, Lenina and John are more different than the book characters, I guess. And Bernard has a lot of overlap. He has the same kind of, not quite alpha plus. He's not short like he is in the book, because he's me and I'm pretty average height. But he does have a certain kind of callowness. He can be hypocritical and jealous and petty. He's got a kind of child made a prefect superciliousness, which is the kind of unattractive part of him. The small-minded manager you meet in that first scene with Lenina, when he's saying monogamy is not something that the social body can afford, or whatever he says. But that's the surface part of him. We get deeper than the book does, but we explore what that does to you, that insecurity, and we allow him to be brave enough.
I'm not who I'm supposed to be. Everyone sees.
In the book, I think it's more Lenina shutting him out from his savage feelings. And in our one, she is someone who explores these feelings, and he is someone who's trying to, on the whole, as he's meant to, kill them with soma and circumstance in terms of the way he lives in New London. But there is a few really nice scenes where he opens up to Lenina and he confides in her that I don't feel right. And he's saying these words that don't feel right even themselves. And it's interesting to see people grapple with a side of humanity that they didn't even know existed, and they know is illegal. And it's a very lonely place when you're not connected to the social body. So it's natural that those two figures kind of come together as the two outsiders. And that's kind of the first part of the triangle setup. And ultimately, it's a bouncing match between all different sides of this triangle between those three characters.
And something that's not necessarily explored when Bernie meets the warden of the Savage Lands, Bernie wasn't supposed to come back.
He didn't tell you.
Tell me what?
Oh, it's time. Do come and find me after the show. I'd love to give you a tour personally.
Well, sorry, excuse me.
Right. So I think they laid that in really kind of nicely, but the whole point, and they spell it out for you again in episode 4, that the director, spoiler, basically was going to get rid of Bernard. And in some ways it's a kind of banishment, but it's it's like a desk job in Siberia. You're going to be warden of the Savage Lands. You're going to look after this amusement park. For an alpha plus counselor, it's definitely a big sidestep. And so, but he didn't tell him that. He says he goes on holiday. He was also meant to go to the park. He was meant to do what he's meant to do with Lenina and his friends in the pool and go the next day on the tour. So it was always a big thing that they didn't decide. They decided not to have sex, and they decided to go on the tour that afternoon. So the warden is surprised to see him. They're not meant to be at that specific performance at that specific time. So it would have all been very different, but they chose this savage way. So I love how that kind of decision is responsible for all the craziness that they experienced, because they didn't do what they were meant to do. But yeah, if it had all gone properly, they would have gone the next day, and Bernard would have had an awkward meeting, and he would have not come back. Yeah, he would have been out there for years as the warden of the Savage Lands, which is weirdly he'd be quite good at.
Well, I mean, I think that's also an interesting thing that is very unique to this adaptation, is that there's alpha plus, alpha, alpha minus, beta plus, beta, like the hierarchies within hierarchies are much more stark in Brave New World.
Alpha, alpha, beta, beta, gamma, delta, beta, alpha, alpha. And of course, the poor bastard's cleaning up her epsilons.
Excellent.
For Bernie, you kind of touched on it. There is this thing where he's not quite an alpha plus, but he is an alpha plus. And I feel like it impacts him and his relationships with Lenina and Helm the most. Lenina and kind of putting her in her place because he's trying to do it to himself.
Because you were happy.
I wasn't. And neither were you.
Everybody's happy unless they choose not to be.
And Helm, because I hate to, is Helm his compass?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I think she's the only friend because she's artistic and crazy, and she too is not enthralled to the society and blindly obliging of its customs. She takes her soma, but she's also trying to supersede it. She's trying to make people feel stuff. Not at this time, illegal feelings, but just to try and juice this puppy up a little bit. So he can always talk to her. And it seems like she refers in that first scene that Bernard often comes and sits in that chair and complains about not feeling like an alpha plus. And she's this kind of therapist as well. There's a lovely friendship there because she is an alpha plus and right at the top of the social body. And Bernard should be, but he's not. He's this little kind of lost puppy. But she's not with him out of pity at all. She really, in the same way, maybe like Lenina, she sees something kind of earnest and truthful about him. He's really trying to tell the truth and is aware bit by bit that everything is a lie. And she can definitely, both those women will connect with that.
So Bernie gets back. He's not supposed to be back.
Right.
One question I think stands out for a lot of folks, and like it continues to revolve around my head. Does he like John? Does he not like John? Is this his ladder up? Like I feel like he teeters between being a protector and being a friend because he's never really had a friend outside of him.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Yeah, his feelings about John to begin with are secondary to what John gives him. Ultimately, once the very episode of the beginning of episode 4, John is now alone here in New London, and Mustafa Mond herself, higher than the director even, says, "You know what, Bernard, this is your job." And even though the beta Julian later says, "Oh, that's a crap task. You have to go. What's the deal with a savage?"
I was chosen.
Yikes.
It's a special assignment. I'm charged with John's care until he becomes part of the social body, I suppose.
Bernard takes it very seriously. I think not least because it comes from Mustafa.
What if I can't?
Then Indra will make a correction.
Well, Indra doesn't do that.
Tell that to the Epsilon.
And she lets him into the kind of secrets behind the curtain a bit about we are being tested. John is actually a product of Indra's stuff. And so we begin to explore that storyline, macro level of what this world is, how is it sustained, why was it built, which we kind of see running along in parallel in the background, and which Bernard has different glimpses of in his dealings with Mustafa. So to begin with, John is my key to the city. And I, to begin with, want to protect him, and I save him from the Feely Theatre, but I also realize this is my chance.
The director of Stability has invited us to attend.
That Henry guy? I thought you hated him.
Henry Foss is a very important person, and his formal induction ceremony is tomorrow morning.
Exciting.
Yeah,
But then I do grow to like him. He annoys me, but I do feel quite protective of him because I feel protective of my time in the Savage Lands and everything that I achieved. I drove an auto car and I got shot. So therefore, I'm a bit of a hero. And John will remind people that I'm a hero. And then rather than try to explore this savage pain that Lenina is, he completely represses it and just wants to enjoy the perks that this savage feeling can give him in the new world.
Was different there, wasn't it?
It's best not to think about it.
All I do is think about it.
Oh, well, then you come to the right place. How are your levels?
And him and John go on this kind of 6-day, bachelor party. It's kind of everything that Bernard wants.
What is actually important to Bernie? Like what, because I think that's kind of the question that sticks out in my head is like, what does this guy actually want? And does he know what he actually wants?
First of all, no, I don't think he knows what he wants. There is something missing. And I think there's a lot of internal debate as to what that is. He thinks it's the director. He thinks it's the approval of his peers like Henry Foster. He then thinks it's the affection or attention of Lenina, but he wrestles with that because he knows he shouldn't want that and he's scared of that. But he's looking for love in a very human, basic way. Just the sad thing is he doesn't know what love is and he's never really heard of it and doesn't think it exists. Which actually, when you put it like that, doesn't sound very different to a lot of people in our world, because that's what it's like for most people. So he doesn't know exactly what it's, but he knows that something's missing. And I think in terms of would he pick John over Lenina, what's important, or would he pick Mustafa? He's trying to be everyone to everything, which is why I think you get all these different kind of colors. And I think as the later season goes on, he does settle down and he takes a few punches, literally. And I don't think necessarily understands what is true and what necessarily as things are taken away from him. And then you see kind of what's left. But he's also given a huge amount. Yeah, I'm trying to take your beautiful, complicated portrait and simplify it, and I probably just complicated it. But I guess that's his bag. And I never worried about that or felt that I had to streamline through that and pick a narrative thread so the audience could follow it, because I trusted the script completely. When I read them the first time as an audience member, just being like, okay, is this turning my page? Am I into it before I get stuck into what I have to do? And every time, I was involved, and I cared about all the parts of the triangle and the rest of the world and these other characters. So I thought, okay, this script is also just really juicy and weird and is capable of taking a lot. And someone will tell me if I go too far short, that they won't do that because they wouldn't. And I used to talk to David about, Bernard says this to Lenina, and then this other scene, he then does this. And like in New London, and he's like, well, he was lying, or he just contradicts himself, because they're human. It doesn't quite work. But no one wants to look at that because they're so busy getting happy and stuff. It's the fact that why would you want to know truth when you have happiness? It's like, just don't worry about it. And I had to learn to do that myself. I'm like, you know what, Bernard's going to do that, and the next thing he's going to do that. He may be confused. I may be confused. And the audience for a second maybe. But you're always going to be able to follow his wayward intentions and be able to be like, he never does anything. You're like, whoa, Bernard, what are you doing? Because I think you're given a lot of ingredients, and you know all these different things that are feeding into him and what's making him tick.
Well, and I think that comes out in the humanization of this moment where he's making this toast at the director's dinner. It is, look, Harry, it is the most uncomfortable.
Can I have everybody's attention, please, just for, thank you. I know you were all expecting John, and you were excited, but actually I have something else that I brought with me today. Better. Me.
It is the most uncomfortable 5 minutes of the entire series. Yeah, I'm literally I want to cry.
Oh, it's horrible.
For Bernie horrible. In that moment. Because we've all been there. We've all been in that moment where we're just like uncomfortably trying to figure a thing out. And it's just, how long did it take you to film? Like, that just seems so painful.
It was horrible. I mean, it was quite a long scene. It's part of that big dinner table scene. You're shooting like 20 people on a really long, thin table. And I come over and talk to Henry. So you got to shoot my line to helm things. You got a lot of different little setups. And I think it wasn't until the end, after we got all these different pieces, where they then did this kind of big wide and a couple of cameras on me. And it kind of let me go to town a bit. And it was nice to save it up. So I had other people's like genuine reactions to play with. And I had a few goes and I made up some stuff. But ultimately, most of the stuff, I think what they used was pretty much there. And it was hard for me. I think I fluffed it a few times because I'm trying to make it a little bit less awkward, because on the page, I'm like, you can't say those things. That's like, why would anyone do that? I had to work really hard to really show what he was trying to do and how he was messing up. But I was really scared of it, just myself, because I'm like, I don't know, I can, but again, and then I start worrying, because the whole point is you're meant to feel like that, and you're meant to feel like that when you watch it. And I'm meant to feel like that when I'm doing it. So it's just a big cringe fest all around. But then part of me towards the end, I did start quite enjoying it. And hopefully I didn't ham it up too much. But then you start thinking like, okay, you know what? Let's have it that halfway through the waiter comes and tries to give him and fill him up his water. And because he's Bernie, he'll let him, and he'll be quite helpful. And then so we started kind of playing with it a bit.
Oh, the moment he says, let me start over, I'm just like, oh no, where are your friends?
I was in a savage lands. Yeah. But the thing about Ben is he's trying. You can't really ever write him off, because bless him, he's really trying. Yeah. And it's horrible, but it's kind of sweet.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna start again.
Well, that about wraps it up for us here. So thank you again to David Wiener and Harry Lloyd for stopping by to geek out with us about the show. And thank you for listening and watching us geek out about the show. If you like this episode and you want to hear more, make sure that you subscribe to Brave New Pod, the official podcast of Brave New World, and, rate us. Leave us a review so that the rest of New London knows that we're trendy and hip, and they hear about the pod. And of course, if you haven't already, go watch all 9 episodes of Brave New World on Peacock TV, and then check out all the other amazing science fiction content available to you right now on Peacock.